Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading. Now we would be analyzing the daily edition of the Hindu newspaper of 8th of July 2019, and the news that would be covered today is given on the screen, and the timestamp for the same is given in the description and the comment section given below. And so now with this, let us start with the first article. Now we have taken this opinion-based editorial from the editorial page on page 10. Now what you need to know first is that the 34th ASEAN Summit was recently held in June of 2019, and one of the important aspects of this summit was that the ASEAN countries gave out the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, whereby this document highlights as to what is the perspective of the ASEAN countries as together on the Indo-Pacific concept. Now before moving forward, what you need to know is what is the Indo-Pacific region in geographical terms. Now if you take a look at this map, the red line shows the Indo-Pacific area, whereby it extends from the eastern coast of Africa, around the countries of Australia and New Zealand, to the coast of the United States of America. Whereby the Indo-Pacific is basically the convergence of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Now apart from this, it is the South China Sea and more importantly the ASEAN countries which lie at the heart of the Indo-Pacific concept. Now there are three main significance of the recent roadmap which has been given out by ASEAN for the Indo-Pacific concept. Now before understanding the significance of the outlook given by ASEAN on the Indo-Pacific concept, it is first important to understand is why are the ASEAN countries themselves important with regards to the Indo-Pacific region. Now as you already understand, the heart of the Indo-Pacific concept is the South China Sea. Now the South China Sea is basically bordered mostly by the ASEAN countries, which is Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Laos, Philippines, and Brunei. And it is within that concept that the ASEAN countries become hugely relevant with regards to any future of geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific region. Now the first significance of the concept paper which has been released by ASEAN on Indo-Pacific is that it has been ASEAN's attempt to reclaim the strategic narrative on the Indo-Pacific concept. Now what you need to understand is the ASEAN grouping has been reluctant to engage with the Indo-Pacific concept, whereby it was a fear among the ASEAN countries that if they ever gave out a concept with regards to the Indo-Pacific region, then it would not be liked by China. Whereby several ASEAN countries such as Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines and others are currently in conflict with China over various islands in South China Sea. And therefore it was assumed by the ASEAN countries that if they gave out a concept on how the Indo-Pacific region and therefore on how the South China Sea should function, it would not be liked by China, and therefore the ASEAN countries became reluctant and did not give out a concept of the Indo-Pacific region up till now. However, what happened in 2018 forced the ASEAN countries to give out their own concept of the Indo-Pacific region. Now what had happened is that India, Japan, Australia, the United States all separately gave out their own vision of the Indo-Pacific region. And therefore the ASEAN countries themselves realized that if they themselves did not give out an approach on how to handle the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific region, then it would allow the other countries such as India, Japan, Australia and the United States to build their narratives on how the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific region should pan out. And therefore what this would do is marginalize the ASEAN countries themselves who are at the heart of the Indo-Pacific concept. Therefore, it is within that concept that the ASEAN countries gave out an outlook on the Indo-Pacific region, and that is why the author has said that the ASEAN countries are reclaiming the narrative of the Indo-Pacific region. Now, this is what leads us to the second significance of ASEAN countries giving out an outlook on the Indo-Pacific region, wherein the concept of the Indo-Pacific, which has been given out by the ASEAN countries, is intended to restrain the United States and China, who are the major powers within the Indo-Pacific region, to enforce their own narratives on the Indo-Pacific region, especially with regards to South China Sea. Now, as you already understand, several ASEAN countries are currently engaged in a dispute with China over various islands in the South China Sea. However, apart from this, several countries such as Myanmar, Indonesia, Vietnam also do not want the United States to be the lead country which gives out a narrative on how the South China Sea should function. And it is within that context that the ASEAN countries themselves do not want either the United States or China to lead the narrative on the Indo-Pacific concept, especially with regards to the South China Sea. Therefore, this ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific region intends to restrain both the United States and China in enforcing their own narrative to the Indo-Pacific region and to the South China Sea. Now, the third main significance of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific region is that it provides a roadmap to ensure the concept of ASEAN centrality to the Indo-Pacific concept. Now, as some of you might be aware of, before ASEAN gave out its own outlook on the Indo-Pacific region, it used to insist on the concept of ASEAN centrality to the Indo-Pacific concept. Now, what this meant is that any country such as India, Japan, Australia, United States, China, or any other country was going to form a policy with regards to the Indo-Pacific region that they had to ensure that they kept the interest of the ASEAN countries or the ASEAN grouping as center to their own concept of the Indo-Pacific region, whereby the vision of any country with regards to the Indo-Pacific region should not violate or should not be against the national interest of the ASEAN grouping. Now, countries such as India and Japan had already agreed to this concept of ASEAN centrality while forming their own concept of the Indo-Pacific region. So, as some of you might be aware of, Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2018 gave the Shangri-La Dialogue, in which he highlighted as to what would be India's policy with regards to the Indo-Pacific region. And the first point that Prime Minister Narendra Modi made, that India would follow ASEAN centrality with regards to the Indo-Pacific region, whereby India would ensure that the national interest of the ASEAN countries and the ASEAN grouping would be kept in mind while India forms its own policy with regards to the Indo-Pacific region. However, there was a problem for countries such as India and Japan that had agreed to the concept of ASEAN centrality to Indo-Pacific region, whereby the ASEAN countries themselves had not given out any form of roadmap structure as to what is their actual national interest within the Indo-Pacific region. Therefore, it is within this context that ASEAN gave out its own outlook on the Indo-Pacific region and thereby has stated as to what is their national interest with regards to the Indo-Pacific region and more specifically with regards to South China Sea. And therefore, it becomes easier for countries such as India, Japan to form their own policy with regards to the Indo-Pacific region that is in convergence or in sync with the policies of the ASEAN countries for the Indo-Pacific region. And therefore, it allows for countries such as India and Japan to ensure ASEAN centrality to the Indo-Pacific concept. Now, after understanding the significance of the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific region, let us understand its main features. Now, the first main feature of the ASEAN outlook is that they intend for the Indo-Pacific region to be a peaceful region. And within that context, they have said that there should be a restraint on the rise of material power. Now, when we say the rise of material power, it means the rise of military power and coercive economic power. Now, as you already might know, that China has been building various military bases and reclaiming various islands within the South China Sea. Similarly, China is also undertaking the Belt Road Initiative, whereby under the Belt Road Initiative, China has been accused of using debt infrastructure and thereby trapping various countries of the Indo-Pacific region in loans which they are not able to repay. And it is within that context that the ASEAN has said that there should be a restraint on the rise of military power within the region, and similarly there should be a decline in the use of corrosive economic power within the region. The second main feature of the ASEAN outlook is that according to the ASEAN countries, their outlook for the Indo-Pacific region complements the existing regional frameworks. Now, as you already may know, the RCEP Free Trade Agreement or the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Free Trade Agreement is currently being formed under the concept of ASEAN centrality, whereby it is being formed by the 10 ASEAN countries and their 6 FTA partners, which includes China, India, Australia, New Zealand, Japan and others. Therefore, within that concept, according to the ASEAN countries themselves, their own vision of the Indo-Pacific region is supposed to be complementary to the existing framework. However, it is yet to be seen that whether it is complementary to the vision of the Indian Ocean Rim Association or the BIMSTEC organization or various other regional frameworks that currently exist within the Indo-Pacific region. Now, one important aspect of the ASEAN outlook is that they intend for a quick conclusion of a code of conduct within the South China Sea. Now, earlier there used to be a code of conduct for the South China Sea. However, this code of conduct was not being followed by China. And within that context, the ASEAN countries are in negotiations with other powers of South China Sea to form a code of conduct, whereby each country would follow the guidelines of this code of conduct with regards to their behavior in the South China Sea. However, what you should know is that the ASEAN countries and China have major differences on how this code of conduct should be formed. Therefore, even though the ASEAN countries want a quick conclusion to the code of conduct in the South China Sea, but it seems very unlikely that it would be agreed upon by China in a quick manner. Now, the fourth main feature of the ASEAN outlook is that according to the ASEAN countries, the Indo-Pacific region is not a continuous territorial space. Now, as you already understand, the Indo-Pacific concept is basically a mergence of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and thereby it would include the Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengal, the South China Sea, including the waters of the eastern coast of Africa, the coast of Australia, up till the coast of the United States. However, according to the ASEAN countries, the Indo-Pacific region is not a continuous territorial space, whereby they consider the South China Sea as to be a separate paradigm within the Indo-Pacific region, the Bay of Bengal to be a separate paradigm, the Arabian Sea to be a separate paradigm, whereby even though all of these are interlinked to each other, but they are different geopolitical spaces. Now it is yet to be seen as to what would be the response of the other major powers, especially India, of ASEAN dividing the Indo-Pacific region to different geopolitical spaces. And later in this section, we're going to understand as to what is India's concern to this particular feature of the ASEAN outlook for the Indo-Pacific region. Now, India has welcomed this outlook on the Indo-Pacific region, which has been given out by the ASEAN grouping, whereby India has also said that it already follows ASEAN centrality for the Indo-Pacific region. However, there is one concern for India. Now, as you already understand, the Indo-Pacific concept includes the Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengal, South China Sea, and various other regions. However, what is currently being seen is that countries such as Japan, the United States, and the ASEAN countries want India to participate and contain China within the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean. However, none of these countries are willing to ensure India's national interest is maintained within the Arabian Sea or even within the Bay of Bengal, whereby none of these countries are willing to share India's security concerns that emerge within the Arabian Sea, especially with regards to Pakistan, the CPEC corridor, and China's string of pearls. And therefore, this has become a major concern for India, whereby several countries such as Japan, United States, and ASEAN are not willing to see the Indo-Pacific region as a continuous territorial space, whereby they want India to help the ASEAN countries and the United States and Japan with regards to their security concerns of China within the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean, but they're not willing to understand India's security concerns within the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. Now, this is the main crux of this editorial, and hopefully you've understood as to what is the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific region and what has been India's response towards it. Now you should see this editorial and the explanation given in this section from the perspective of JS Paper 2 within the section International Relations. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this opinion-based editorial from page 11. Now what this editorial mainly highlights are the various current problems within the Indian economy, especially with regards to fiscal consolidation. Now the first thing that you need to understand is what is fiscal consolidation. Now, in simplest of terms, fiscal consolidation means that the government is going to reduce its fiscal deficit and thereby reduce the debt that the government owes. Now, the finance minister in the recent speech on the budget has said that the government of India is going to maintain a fiscal deficit of 3.3% for the current financial year. And over time, they're going to ensure that this fiscal deficit is reduced to 3% over the coming years. Now, it is within that context that the author within this editorial has highlighted various concerns with regards to the fiscal consolidation plan of the Government of India. Now, as you already understand, in the recently released economic survey, the chief economic advisor has said that private investment would be the key driver of economic growth within India. And it is within that context that this recent economic survey of 2018-19 limits the scope of public investment. Now, public investment is basically the investment by the Government of India or the state governments into the Indian economy. However, the economic survey of 2018-19 has said that to ensure a proper economic growth for India so as to achieve a $5 trillion economy by 2024-25, the key driver for this economic growth would be private investment and not public investment. However, the author has highlighted a problem with regards to this. Now, it has generally been seen is that when countries are undergoing an economic slowdown, public investment is required so as to boost private investment. Now, a simple example of this is, let's say the Government of India increases the number of tenders for road construction, house construction, construction of telecom towers, and other various aspects. Now, all of these construction projects would be undertaken by private sector. And through this procedure of public investment by the Government of India, it can increase private investment. However, what has happened is that the Economic Survey of 2018-19 limits the scope of public investment, whereby according to the Economic Survey, it should be private investment within itself that drives the economic growth. So again, let's say for an example, rather than having the central government give out tenders for the construction of telecom towers through BSNL or MTNL, it should be private companies such as Airtel, Vodafone, Jio that give out for the formation of telecom towers, whereby it is through the private investment of the telecom companies that they can ensure economic growth for the Indian economy. However, the author has raised concern with regards to this policy recommendation of the economic survey, whereby according to the author, the private sector in itself does not have the enough required capital to ensure the large amount of investment that is required within the Indian economy so as to achieve an economic growth rate of 8%, so as to achieve $5 trillion economy by 2024-25. Now, the second concern which has been highlighted by the author is that the crowding out effect has decreased the ability of the private sector to invest within the Indian economy. Now, in simplest of terms, what this means is that the public sector banks and the private banks are charging very high interest rates for giving out loans. Now, because of the very high interest rates which the banks are charging, the private sector first is not willing to undertake such high interest loans. Now, apart from this, when the private sector does take high interest loans, they're not able to make out a good profit after paying back the interest and the principal amount to the banks, whereby the small profit which the private sector has made by undertaking such high interest loans is not large enough to ensure an 8% growth within the Indian economy. Therefore, according to the author, this policy recommendation of the Economic Survey of 2018-19 that private investment should be the key driver for economic growth within India is unlikely to happen, first because of the crowding out effect and secondly because of the twin balance sheet problem. Now, in simplest of terms, what the twin balance sheet problem is that it first deals with the balance sheet of banks within India and secondly it deals with the balance sheet of corporate sector within India, whereby according to the twin balance sheet problems, the balance sheets of the banks are currently facing a problem due to non-performing assets, while the balance sheet of corporate sector within India is facing a problem due to high debt. Now, because of the high non-performing assets and because of the provisioning requirement, banks do not have enough amount of money to lend to the private sector, and the amount of money which they do have to lend to the private sector is given out at a very high interest rate. Similarly, the corporate sector within India, especially various financially distressed sectors such as the power sector, the telecom sector, currently have a large amount of debt that they owe to banks and non-banking finance companies. Now, because of the economic slowdown within the Indian economy, various corporate sectors within India are making a lower profit. And apart from the low profit, because of the crowding out effect, several corporate sectors within India have less amount of money that they are able to invest within the Indian economy. And it is within that context that the author has said that because of all of these three problems, it becomes very unlikely that the policy recommendation of the economic survey to have the private investment as being the key driver for economic growth, especially 8% economic growth, seems very unlikely. Now, the second problem which has been highlighted by the author is with regards to the expenditure of the Government of India. Now, the author has highlighted one positive aspect with regards to the government expenditure, whereby the Government of India has been able to control the expenditure on major subsidies such as fertilizer and petroleum, whereby the government expenditure on subsidies used to be around 2% of GDP, which has now reduced to 1.4% of GDP. However, the concern which the author has raised is that there has been an increase in the expenditure of the Government of India, first with the launch of the PM Kisan scheme, whereby according to the author within this editorial, the PM Kisan scheme is going to cost around 75,000 crore for the Government of India. And similarly, what the author has also shown is that the expenditure on the Manrega scheme continues to increase year on year. Apart from this, what should also be known is that because of the recent crisis between Iran and the United States, there is an increased volatility within the oil prices. And therefore, if there is a sudden increase within the oil prices, it can lead to an increased expenditure for the Government of India. Now, according to the author, because of both of these factors, it would become difficult for the Government of India to maintain the fiscal deficit at 3% in the coming future and thereby remain on a path of fiscal consolidation. Now, the third concern which the author has raised is with regards to the tax to GDP ratio. Now, what the author has said is that there has been a low growth of tax to GDP ratio within the current fiscal year. Now, it was estimated that India's tax to GDP ratio should have been around 12.4%. However, the current tax to GDP ratio is around 11 to 9%, and therefore there has been a low growth rate of tax to GDP ratio in India. Now, basically, what this means is, let's say the GDP of a country is rupees 100, and if the tax to GDP ratio of a country is 12%, then it means that the government of this particular country is able to get rupees 12 as part of its revenue. And because of this increased revenue for the government, they can decrease their fiscal deficit and ensure fiscal consolidation for the economy. Now, the main reason, according to the author, as to why there has been a low growth rate of tax to GDP ratio within India is because of the shortfall in the GST collection. Now, because the government was able to collect lesser tax as form of GST collection, it reduced their tax to GDP ratio. Now, because of both of these reasons, there would be a decrease in the revenue that is earned by the government of India. There is a strong chance that it would lead to an increase in fiscal deficit, whereby fiscal deficit in basic terms means revenue minus expenditure. And because the revenue has decreased, but the expenditure of the government of India is expected to increase, it therefore would lead to an increase in fiscal deficit. Now, as you already might be aware of, the Economic Survey of 2018-19 has said that for Government of India to increase its revenue, it could disinvest a certain part of its percentage within public sector units. And apart from this, the Government of India can also sell the land which belong to public sector units so as to raise revenue. However, the problem which has been shown by the author that this policy of disinvestment in public sector units has had limited success when it was used within the past. Apart from this, what the author has also shown that this disinvestment procedure in public sector units is a very long process. And apart from this, what the author has also shown is that the value of the land is prone to controversy, whereby what generally happens is that government quotes a very high amount to sell this particular piece of land. And what generally happens is that the private sector is not able to pay this high amount for this particular piece of land. And thereby it leads to a controversy with regards to the valuation of the land which the government of India is trying to sell. And the main problem which the author has shown with regards to disinvestment in public sector enterprising is that it is only an accounting solution, whereby what the economic survey has said is that the government of India can reduce its stake from, let's say, 51% in a particular public sector unit to 40% and thereby sell the remaining 11%. However, what the economic survey has said that this 11% can be sold to a profitable public sector unit such as LIC. Now, what this basically means is that the profit or the revenue of LIC is now being transferred to another public sector unit. Now, what this basically means is that the revenue from one government-owned public sector unit is being transferred to another government-owned public sector unit. And according to the author, this does not address or solve the structural issues that are existing within the Indian economy. And therefore, disinvestment in public sector enterprises is only a very short-term solution with regards to fiscal consolidation. Now, the fifth concern which has been raised by the author is with regards to the reserves of the Reserve Bank of India. Now, I'm not going to go into depth with regards to the conceptual understanding of the RBI reserves. But in the most basic aspect of terms that you need to know is that Reserve Bank of India has various sources of income, and therefore the profit which the Reserve Bank of India is making from these sources of income is transferred to the Government of India because the Government of India is the sole shareholder of the Reserve Bank of India. Now, the amount of money which is transferred by the Reserve Bank of India to the Government of India is part of the revenue for the Government of India. Now, currently, Reserve Bank of India transfers most of the amount that it earns to the Government of India. However, it does maintain some amount of money with itself for various particular reasons. Now, the Government of India had formed the Bimal Jalan Committee on the capital framework of the Reserve Bank of India. Now, one of the aspects which the Bimal Jalan Committee was going to oversee is whether the Reserve Bank of India can further transfer more amount of money to the Government of India from its reserve. Now, what you need to understand that this Bimal Jalan Committee has not been made public as of now. But according to the author, the Bimal Jalan Committee is unlikely to agree to the demand of the Government of India to further transfer money from the RBI reserves to the Government of India. And therefore, this would not be a source of revenue for the Government of India within the future. And therefore, the Government of India cannot rely on further release of RBI reserves to itself as a means to increase its revenue. However, with regards to the last point, let us wait and see as to what would be the recommendation that has been given out by the Bimal-Jalan committee. Now, these are the 5 main concerns with regards to fiscal consolidation that the author has highlighted. Now, you should see this article from the perspective of GS Paper 3 within the section Economic Development and within the subsection Indian Economy and Issues Relating to Planning, Growth, Development, and also from the subsection of Government Budgeting. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this editorial from page 11. Now what is required to be understood from this editorial is given in the article itself. Now what has happened is that the Delhi High Court in the Sajjan Kumar case in 2018 has said that crimes against humanity or genocide needs to be made a part of India's criminal law. Now according to the author, India has already ratified the Genocide Convention of 1948. However, the problem is that India has not enacted as to what is a genocide and how genocide should be punished as part of India's own law. Whereby after ratification of the Genocide Convention, it was required that India also defines genocide within its own domestic or national legislation. Apart from this, what the author has also highlighted is that there is currently negotiations going on for a convention on crimes against humanity, whereby the negotiations for the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity started in 2014. However, according to the author, India has been reluctant to actively participate in the negotiation process for the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity. Now, the author has highlighted various reasons as to why India is reluctant with regards to being active in the current negotiations for the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity. Now, currently, crimes against humanity and genocide is most effectively defined by the International Criminal Court, but India is not a member of the International Criminal Court. And it is within that context that India has said that the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity should not use the same definition with regards to genocide or with regards to defining crimes against humanity as same as that of the International Criminal Court. The second reason highlighted by the author is that India is not in favor of using the term widespread or systematic as one of the conditions for defining crimes against humanity, whereby India has said that the definition within the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity should use widespread and systematic as to define crimes against humanity. The third aspect that India actually wants is that India wants a distinction to be made between international and internal armed conflicts. Now, there is a speculative reason given by the author as to why India wants a distinction between international and internal armed conflicts, whereby currently India is involved in internal conflicts with the Naxals, and similarly, India is involved in international conflicts with non-state actors such as in Kashmir. And India wants the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity to differentiate between both of these aspects. The last reason for reluctance on India's behalf, which has been highlighted by the author, is that India does not want the inclusion of enforced disappearance within the purview of the Conventions on Crimes Against Humanity. Now, currently what is being seen is that the Indian government has been accused of ensuring enforced disappearance within Kashmir, Northeast, and within the Naxal affected areas. And if enforced disappearance does become within the purview of Convention on Crimes Against Humanity, then there is a likely chance that India's actions within Kashmir, Northeast, and in Naxal areas might come under the purview of the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity. And similarly, if India does sign the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity and ratifies it, then it becomes an obligation on India to further criminalize enforced disappearance within India's own national laws. Now, these are the 4 main reasons as given by the author for India's reluctance on active participation in the negotiations for the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity. And hopefully, apart from this, you also understand that the Delhi High Court in the Sajjan Kumar case of 2018 has said that crime against humanity and genocide is required to be defined within the perspective of the Indian law. Now, the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity should be seen from the perspective of GS Paper 2 within the section International Relations. However, the viewpoint of the Delhi High Court in the Sajjan Kumar case should be seen first from the perspective of GS Paper 2 within the section Governance, and secondly from the perspective of GS Paper 3 within the section Security. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 12. Now this article has highlighted a particular concern with regards to the proposed Environment Impact Assessment Notification of 2019, which was recently released by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Now, the Environment Impact Assessment Notification of 2019 aims to be an update of the Environment Impact Assessment Notification of 2006. Now, what has happened is that several provisions of the Environment Impact Assessment of 2006 over the years have been challenged in front of the National Green Tribunal. And therefore, this has led to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change to modify the rules of the Environment Impact Assessment. Now, what has happened is that under the Environment Impact Assessment Notification of 2019, it provides for a three-tier institutional mechanism for giving environmental clearance. Now, under the Environment Impact Assessment Notification of 2019, several projects which has been classified as Category A would be cleared by the central government, while those projects which are under Category B1 would be cleared by the State Environment Impact Assessment Authority, while those projects which have been categorized as being B2 would be cleared by the District Environment Impact Assessment Authority. Now it is with regards to the projects which have been classified as being B2, which would be cleared by the District Environment Impact Assessment Authority. Now what has happened is that the District Environment Impact Assessment Authority will have the district magistrate or the district collector as the chairperson. However, it is to be noted that the district magistrate or the district collector also acts as the district mining officer and is thereby tasked with the responsibility of also issuing leases for mining. And therefore, what this article has highlighted is that having the district magistrate or the district collector as heading both the District Environment Impact Assessment Authority and also as the district mining officer would be a conflict of interest. However, what you need to understand that this news is currently in transition, whereby the Environment Impact Assessment Notification of 2019 has only been proposed and is yet to be made official. And therefore, it is yet to be seen on how the Ministry of Environment resolves this conflict of interest. However, hopefully you've understood as to what is the current concerns with regards to the Environment Impact Assessment Notification of 2019. Now you should see this article and the explanation given in this section from the perspective of GS Paper 3 within the section Environment and within the subsection Environmental Impact Assessment. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this editorial from the editorial page on page 10. Now the context of this editorial is the recent decision of the UP government to provide scheduled caste status to 17 backward castes. And the main crux of this editorial is that this decision of the UP government has no form of legal basis. And apart from this, according to this editorial, this notification of the UP government is most likely to be nullified by the Supreme Court within the future. Now the background information with regards to this notification of the UP government has already been covered comprehensively by Marg ma'am in the Daily News Simplified video of 3rd of July. In particular, what you need to remember from this editorial is about Article 341. And therefore, what we're going to do is understand about Article 341 through questions for practice. Now, there are two questions for practice, and what you need to do is pause this video, solve both of these questions, and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now, the correct answer to question number 1 is D, neither 1 nor 2. Now, under Article 341, the President, with respect to any state or union territory, and after consulting a governor within a particular state, can specify the caste, race, or tribes or parts of a groups within caste, race, or tribes as being scheduled caste within that particular state or union territory. And it is within that context that statement number 1 is incorrect, whereby the President is not bound by the recommendation of the government of a state. While Clause 2 of Article 341 states that Parliament by law include or exclude from the list of scheduled caste any caste, race or tribe. And therefore it is within that context that statement number 2 of question number 1 is incorrect, whereby it is not the governor but the Parliament which may by law exclude from the list of scheduled caste. And apart from this, what you should also know is that Parliament does not require authorization from the President with regards to including or excluding from the list of scheduled caste. Now with regards to question number 2, the correct answer is C, both 1 and 2, whereby as we have already understood, caste, race and tribes can be deemed to be scheduled caste, and similarly it is the Parliament which by law can include or exclude any group from the list of scheduled caste, and therefore both statement number 1 and 2 are correct. And so now with this, let us move on to the next section. Now there are two questions for practice, and as you already understand, pause this video, solve both of these questions, and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now, as you have already understood, it is South China Sea which is considered as being central to the purview of the Indo-Pacific region. While with regards to question number 4, the correct answer is C, both 1 and 2, whereby as we have already understood, if there is a decrease in the tax to GDP ratio, and similarly if there is an increase in government subsidies, both of them have a likely chance of increasing the fiscal deficit for the government of India, and therefore both of them would be considered against having fiscal consolidation. And now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.